Hello and welcome, Packer fans. I'm Narad Chapik, host of For Another Packers podcast. Thank you again for tuning into this week's episode. We are 1 week away from the start of training camp. We are less than 7 days. The rookies will report on Monday the 22nd. The veterans will show up on Wednesday the 24th. By this time next week, by this time next Friday, we'll have one full day of training camp under our belts. And in my opinion, the news will start to just breakthrough. So on today's episode, though, I want to give you a little bit of insight, what I'm personally going to be keeping an eye on as training camp unfolds and evolves, some of my storylines, some of those roster spot competitions. So without further ado, it is time to pour ourselves another Packers podcast. So real quick before I get started, I need to thank the 205 subscribers to this channel as of the time of this recording for subscribing, commenting, liking the video. It's only been 3 months since I started this channel. It's been just a little over 3 months since I came up with the idea. I posted my first video, which didn't even have anything to do with Packers, quite frankly. And I've watched it grow. It's been the off season. It's been a lot of fun. I've continued to just kind of improve my technique, improve my daily habits. If you go back and watch my first couple of videos, my entire background is pathetic. It's boring. It's blank. And I think I need to spruce this up a little bit too. But again, thank you for subscribing. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me. If you haven't already, subscribe down below. We're not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. The Packers aren't going anywhere. So I'm going to continue to drink. I'm going to continue to talk about Packers news. And for me, I wanted to start in one particular spot before I get into all my headlines. And that is what my opinion is of the locked up roster spots heading into the 2019 training camp. So I made this little PDF that I will show now. And as you see, there are a lot of players. There's actually, 35 players that I have in mind that I believe are locks heading into the 2019 season, heading into that full 53-man roster. So at the end of the day, that leaves you with 18 players that need to fight and compete and do everything they can to make their roster. But when we look at this list of 35, you may notice there are certain names that are absent from this list. There might be certain players that are, in your opinion, guaranteed players that will make the roster. And I agree, there are probably anywhere from 5 to 10 players that I could have put on this list, but quite frankly, these are the top 35 that are going to make a roster spot. And everything that I want to talk about really just stems from this list, and let's take it off. So really, when we look at the quarterback situation, we need to figure out a backup to Aaron Rodgers. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I think Deshaun Kaiser is clearly the favorite for that quarterback 2 position. And then you have Tim Boyle coming in there that's going to be competing. They need to figure out that backup quarterback position, but quite frankly, there's going to be 2 quarterbacks that will eventually make the roster, and Aaron Rodgers is one of them. When we look at our running back situation, Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, Dexter Williams, these are the 3 running backs that are going to make the team. I don't think that there is a chance for anyone else to take a spot on the running back position for the team, but really what we're going to want to focus on is Aaron Jones is going to be that number 1 running back heading into week 1. And can Dexter Williams kind of come in there and shake things up and give Jamal Williams a run for his money for some significant playing time as the season gets here and as the season begins to unfold. Looking at our cornerbacks, I absolutely love our cornerback group. All 4 of these guys are going to be starters, or they're going to be a part of that starting lineup depending on what they bring out there. They show the defense. The biggest thing with our cornerbacks, who will emerge for depth? I mean, they drafted Kadar Hallman in this last year's NFL draft. I would like to see 1 or 2 more cornerbacks added to this roster for depth reasons, especially since Kevin King himself is known to be a little bit injury prone, and they no longer have Rashad Breeland. They got rid of him in the offseason. So I would like to see some cornerback depth, but overall, solid group of 4. I'm pretty happy with what we have at cornerback. The defensive line, another solid group of 4. Kenny Clark, Mike Daniels, Dean Lowry, Kingsley Kiki. Very solid players. One is obviously a rookie that has come onto the team, and that's why I made him a lock for this roster spot. But who else is going to fight for the defensive line? Does Montravius Adams make the team again? He was kind of a little bit of a wild card last season. They drafted him just a couple seasons prior, and weren't exactly sure if he would be a contributor. But again, we're looking for some depth. We're looking for people that can fill in, so these 4 guys don't have to go out there every single snap, and they can keep their legs fresh and all that good stuff. Linebacking group, completely loaded. Blake, Za'Darius, Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, Oren Burks, and our new rookie, of course, Ty Summers. You'll notice that most of my rookies outside of Kadar Hallman have made this list as locks. You don't go out and draft players and just send them to your practice squad where they have the potential of getting snatched up by another team. I like what we have at the linebackers. It's an incredible group. I think one name that is missing from this list that you guys will argue about will be Reggie Gilbert. Will he make another leap like he did last year? He was a absolute stud in the preseason. He did contribute somewhat throughout the regular season, but can he make another leap? Can he fight for a roster spot? I sure hope so. I'm actually a pretty big Reggie Gilbert fan, and I know a lot of Packer fans are out there as well. And then the other linebacker that didn't quite make the list, but I do believe will have a successful training camp and make the roster, is James Crawford. He's going to be that guy that you need to add depth behind both Blake Martinez and Oren Burks, because I do see Oren Burks getting the nod, but maybe even James could push Oren Burks for that starting position. So yeah, there's a handful. There's a couple linebackers that I do see competing, and that's why I love these preseason football games. We're only going to see the starters a limited amount of time, and then we're going to start to see what we have and who wants that job and who wants to fight for a career in the NFL. We have to. I enjoy the preseason. You should enjoy preseason as much as I do. You probably do. If you're watching this, I'm sure that's not a problem at all. One that I just want to touch on real briefly is that offensive line. Again, I did a previous video. I encourage you to check it out, but I have 6 guaranteed locks on that offensive line. I do think that they will have 9 at the end of training camp when they have to cut that roster to 53 spots. Really, the main thing that I'm going to keep an eye out on as the training camp unfolds and as preseason games unfold is, can Lane Taylor hold his starting job against Elton Jenkins, or will Elton Jenkins prove that he has everything that it takes to be a starter in the NFL? That's a big matchup that I enjoy watching as training camp unfolds. And then who will take those final 3 spots? You have Justin McCray, you have Spriggs, and you have Cole Madison. These are 3 guys that are projected to make the roster. That would round out our 9 roster spots on that offensive line. But will someone else emerge throughout that mystery? That is why we watch. That is why I read every news article almost every day about what is going on at training camp. I wish I could be there. If I had enough subscribers to this channel, and this thing just took off. I'm at 205. I'm just shy of 1 million, it seems like. I'm sure I could spend my days at training camp getting all of the Packer news and feeding it to you while drinking a cold beverage. Which reminds me, it's time for a drink break before we get into the nitty-gritty. So like I said, everything prior to this, there are storylines. There's going to be tons of storylines throughout training camp. Everything prior to this is going to unfold, but they are not my highlights of what I want to talk about or what I will have my eye on throughout training camp. Where there's a little bit of a gray area, and the area where I want to start is that there's competition at the kicker. So Mason Crosby is coming into his 13th season with the Green Bay Packers. Last season, he went 30 for 37 on field goals, so he kicked about 81%, which is pretty respectable, and that's about average for what he has had the last couple seasons. But he did struggle at times. Particularly, he struggled in Week 5 against the Lions, where he went 1 for 5 on field goals, and that game was an absolute mess. We just couldn't get anything together. That was that botched punt return early on in the game that just screwed us over. So he went 1 for 5 against the Lions, and that's 4 of the 7 misses that he had throughout his season. And then, of course, the other major miss that he had was against Minnesota in Week 2 in overtime, when he could have kicked the game-winning field goal and gave us the victory against Minnesota. So, 5 out of 7, we can kind of narrow down to just a microcosm of his season. But for the most part, he is very dependable. I think he gets the obvious nod at the kicking position, but he does have competition. He has Sam Ficken. He is the lone competitor to Mason Crosby, and throughout some of the OTAs, Ficken was actually, I'm realizing now, Ficken is kind of a fun name to say. Ficken actually outkicked Mason Crosby throughout OTAs, but I don't think there's a whole lot to dive into on that subject. He's considered a first-year player, although he has bounced around the league since 2016. He was originally signed by the Jacksonville Jaguars in 16, but then was released in August. Was part of the Chiefs in training camp in 2017 before being cut, and then late in 17 he signed with the Rams and participated in a total of 4 games. So obviously, as a kicker, it's got to be a short life. I mean, if you don't put up or shut up, your career as a kicker in the NFL does not last very long. With the Rams, he did play in a total of 4 games in the last 2 years. He went 3 for 6 in that span, but he did connect in all 10 of his extra points. We have some competition. I mean, Mason Crosby is getting old. He is one of the 4 remaining Super Bowl players from that 2010-2011 Super Bowl team. Sam's out there. He's going to, there's a little bit of competition. I don't think too much into this one, but it will be interesting to see how it plays out. I think we do need to start strategizing for a backup kicker, because as Mason gets older, it's only a matter of time until he ends up at the Vikings like Ryan Long will, because that's where all great Packers players eventually go to die. Transitioning from the kicking into other special teams. So I want to talk about, this is going to be something that I definitely have my eye on throughout the training camp, the punt returner and kick returner situation. So who will get the chance to field kick returns throughout the preseason? This was a huge problem, and normally here, this is where I would list off where we ranked in the 2018 season, but quite frankly, you do the research yourself. It's awful. We do not rank anywhere close to the top or the middle or even 3/4 of the way up that list. It was a struggle for our kick returners and for our punt returners, and the biggest reason for that, and part of the reason why the wide receiver competition that I'll get to next is going to be interesting, is because Trevor Davis. In 2017, Trevor Davis actually ranked 3rd in the league in punt return yards. So he averaged 12 yards per return, which is an incredible return yardage rate for a punt returner. And here's where things got interesting. So Davis goes out, and the Packers begin to scramble for what they think they need to do for a kick returner. So they experimented with Jair Alexander a little bit. He was, a rookie coming out of college. He returned punts in his freshman and sophomore seasons at Louisville, but he never really came into that position when it came to the Packers. They may have threw him in there once or twice, handful of times, but it never really evolved much further than the preseason when they were experimenting him. So then what happens? There's a guy by the name of Ty Montgomery who decided to take over for that punt return, kick return action. And quite frankly, that cost him his job. If you remember, and if you don't want any sad memories from last season, I encourage you to fast forward to the next segment, but he fumbled the ball with 2 minutes left in that very close game in Los Angeles against the Rams. We were down by 2. Like I said, with 2 minutes left, Rodgers just needed a chance to get the ball and march down the field. All we needed was a field goal to win the game. And of course, he takes it out of the end zone, fumbles the ball. All the Rams have to do at that point is run out the clock, and it wasn't very pretty. So after that week, Ty Montgomery went bye-bye. Tramon Williams stepped in at a point. But again, with his age, I don't think Tramon Williams will be the answer for our kick return or punt return situation. And then again, Brashad Breeland also filled in last year, but he is long gone. So there's not a whole lot of options or very many options left outside of that. Maybe they pick some of our young wide receivers who are on the bubble. And quite frankly, I think Trevor Davis is on that bubble. If you could look at a guy like Devin Hester, he was never overly successful as a wide receiver for the Bears, but man, when it came to punt returns and kick returns, that was his bread and butter, and he made his entire career off of that. Maybe that can be the case for Trevor Davis. And no, I'm not saying Trevor Davis is anywhere as good as Devin Hester, but maybe that will be Trevor Davis's calling and his success with the Green Bay Packers. Transitioning from Davis, we have to talk about that wide receiver situation. So obviously we have Davante Adams at wide receiver 1. I have discussed previously, especially when we did our top 5 breakdown of players heading into the 2019 season, I had Geronimo Allison as my clear favorite for that number 2 wide receiver spot. And I'm still sticking hard on that one, but I think things are becoming a little bit more interesting, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch if MVS or Marquez Valdes-Scantling will give Geronimo Allison a run for the money for that number 2. We don't know how this Matt LaFleur offense is going to look, if it even matters if you're the 2 or the 3 or the 4 wide receiver. I think what really boils down is who is going to jump out as the most talented or Aaron Rodgers' favorite target outside of Davante Adams. This last offseason, MVS spent with Hall of Famer Randy Moss. So Monday through Thursday, he was practicing and training with Randy Moss, which that can only make him better as a wide receiver. So that 1-2 battle that between MVS and Geronimo is definitely something I plan on watching. And then outside of that, what is going to shape up in that wide receiver position? Who's going to compete for a job? So I had 5 locks: Adams, Allison, Scantling, St. Brown, and Kumaro. 5 locks. I believe all 5 of those guys will make the roster. Kumaro specifically because Rodgers is a man crushing him. And who can blame him? That long, glorious hair and that beard. I used to rock a similar look like that. Maybe I'll throw a picture up. I probably won't, though. I don't want to taint exactly what I have going on right now. But who competes for a job? Does Jamon Moore compete for a roster spot? Does he make the team this year? They kept him around last year, I think, primarily because he was a higher draft pick, and they didn't want to move him to the practice squad with the fear of him getting cut. He struggled with drops. Hopefully it improves. Otherwise, that is going to be a draft bust of all draft busts from last year's draft. And then, as we already discussed, Trevor Davis, does he compete for a job? 5 wide receivers that I see locked in. If you add those 2, that's 7. I don't think the Packers keep more than 7 at that wide receiver position. And the reason why I don't think the Packers keep more than 7 is because we're going to talk about our tight ends. And our tight ends group is pretty stacked, and I like what we have at tight ends. So 6 tight ends heading into training camp, and it really just boils down to the main 4. And these are the 4 that I do see making the roster, but I couldn't lock all 4 of them just because there's a whole lot of unknowns. When you break it down, we have 2 veterans, Jimmy Graham and Mercedes Lewis, and then you have 2 young studs in Robert Tonyan and, of course, Jace Sternberger. So Jimmy Graham was the second leading receiver last season. He had 55 passes, 636 yards, and he struggled with both a knee and a hand injury, but he did play all 16 games. Jimmy Graham needs to have a bounce back season. We paid him a lot of money. I think he will have a bounce back season, at least if I don't think it, my heart just wants to believe that he will have a bounce back season. And I do think that another year playing with Rodgers and starting to build that chemistry, which we did start to see later on throughout the season, will do wonders for Jimmy Graham. So I see him obviously locked in there. If they wanted to get rid of him or if they wanted to cut him, they wouldn't have waited till training camp. They would have done that a long time ago. They could have saved some cap room and moved on from him. Mercedes Lewis is an interesting one. So you'll notice I didn't put him in it as my lock for a roster spot. He was probably the most underused player in the offense last year, and we can't necessarily go off of that because we do have a new offensive coordinator, a new offensive mind, a new head coach with Matt LaFleur. So will he be more utilized this year? Last year he had 3 catches for 39 yards, but for him it wasn't all about the pass catching. It was more about he was absolutely praised for his blocking abilities, and if this run game is going to improve like I have predicted it will improve, I think Mercedes Lewis does make the roster again. They actually did re-sign him in the offseason, so I'd be surprised if they cut him in training camp, but who knows? Who knows what you're going to get? Maybe the next 2 guys that I'm about to talk about just show up and play out of their minds, and they have no reason to stick on to Mercedes. So you have to talk about Robert Tonyan. He filled in with the first team this offseason while Mercedes was finishing up his degree, so he got that nod over Jay Sternberger, and he spent the last couple months training with All-Pro George Kittle and was a shining star in training camp last year. So obviously he was a fan favorite. He won the hearts and minds of all the Wisconsin ladies who pay attention enough to Packers football. Well, I bet you my wife has no idea who Robert Tonyan is whatsoever. But he did eventually get to see some actual regular season playing time when he had that long bomb to Rodgers, or from Rodgers, in that Seattle game back in November of last year. So Robert Tonyan, he's young, he's talented. I think he is an answer for someone that you want to keep on that roster. Then, of course, you have our 3rd round pick back in April, Jay Sternberger. He was my 2nd favorite player of the NFL draft, right behind Darnell Savage. And again, last year for Texas A&M, he had 48 catches for 832 yards and 10 touchdowns, and he ran a 4.75 yard dash, 40-yard dash in the NFL Combine. So he's fast, he's young, you're not paying him a whole lot of money. He's going to learn a lot behind Jimmy Graham. Hopefully he learns a lot behind Jimmy Graham. And I think when we look to the future of our tight end group, I think you're going to have Robert Tonyan and Sternberger there probably as your main guys next season. I think this could possibly be Mercedes Lewis last season because he is entering the 14th year in the NFL. So my biggest thing that I'm going to watch with this group is how do they interact with that offense. Like I said, we're not going to solely focus on wide receivers for passing attacks. I think they are kind of stacked when it comes to these tight ends that can catch and move out of the backfield. And I would love to see Jace make a run for some playing time. I'd like to see Robert Tonyan solidify himself that last year was not just a fluke and that he can be the future of this team once Graham and Lewis move on. But I think all 4 of these guys are stacked to make the roster. I feel bad if you are a tight end. One of the other 2, I didn't look up their names, but if you are the other 2 tight ends in this group, I apologize. I don't think your time in Green Bay is going to be much longer. 2 final topics that I want to discuss before we finish up this video. So the other area that needs some attention, and especially if you looked at my locked up roster spots, there's only 2 guys that I have locked up at the safety position. That is Darnell Savage, of course, and Adrian Amos. And I think we are absolutely stacked. I mean, I love these 2 guys as starters. I think our safety group with just those 2 is going to be so much better than it was last year. But who is behind them? We have a total of 6 total safeties heading into training camp. We have to start with Josh Jones. I could have swore by now that he would not be a part of the Packers at this point. I figured they would have gotten rid of him, cut him, or traded him. But like I had predicted, he probably doesn't have a whole lot of trade equity. So let's see if he shows up at training camp. That is my number one, kind of thought process, or I guess I don't want to make it a headline, but it's something that I'm definitely keeping an eye on as training camp rolls around. Will he be there? Will he compete? Because quite frankly, behind Amos and Savage, they need depth, and I hope Josh Jones realizes that they need him, that he is going to play a role on that defense still, even if he is not a starter. He can go out there and compete. Outside of Josh Jones, you have Raven Green. He's an undrafted free agent from last year. He played in 8 games, had a handful of tackles, 1 sack, a forced fumble. Not lighting up the world by any means. You have Trey Matthews. He was signed by the Packers on December 31st of last season. He was an undrafted free agent from the Vikings, spent a little time in the practice squad in Indianapolis, originally enrolled in Georgia as a 4-star recruit. So this is outside of Jones. I think Trey Matthews, in my opinion, could have the most upside as far as that 3rd person on the depth chart, or someone that with some coaching and a little bit of TLC, he could be a good player in the NFL. So he was originally enrolled in Georgia as the 4-star recruit coming out of high school back in 2013. He transferred from Georgia to Auburn, where he played his final 3 seasons in college football. He was primarily a tackling safety, and he doesn't record a whole lot of interceptions. But when we're looking at what we have at depth in that safety group, I think he was someone that was highly regarded coming out of high school. He didn't quite get a fair shake when it came to being an undrafted free agent with the Vikings. He's been jumping around from team to team. I think if he could find himself a home on a defense like Green Bay, where they need some safety help, and he could get opportunities to play, I think that would do wonders for him. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on Trey Matthews. And then, of course, our last safety on that roster is going to be Mike Tyson. Again, not the one that bites ears, but the one that was drafted by Seattle in the 6th round in 2017. He spent most of his rookie season on that practice squad. Was cut after the 2018 training camp, so a year later. Picked up by Houston. He played in about 10 games, had 4 tackles, a pass defense, and 2 starts. So he has a little bit of playing experience in the NFL. Has been around the league for 2 seasons now. They need to figure this out. They need to figure out what they have going on behind those 2. If they have to go out and sign someone, they need to go out and sign someone, because you can't just go in to the regular season with 2 studs at safety. Although it's better than no studs at safety, you gotta have that backup plan, and I want to see that safety group evolve. And that's something I'm going to be having my eyes on. The last thing that I'm going to be watching, probably closer than anything, and I'm sure there'll be lots of news articles about it. They're probably already starting to type them up now, even before anything's happened. But will the Packers be ready for week 1? And there's a couple things that go into this, right? So the main thing that you have to look at is the playing time for Rodgers. Historically, Rodgers has not had a ton of playing time in the preseason. Yes, he might play, half a game either in that second game or that third game of the preseason. He typically sits out that 4th game. It makes sense. I mean, Rodgers got hurt in week 1 against the Bears, and it faltered a whole season. So the more snaps he gets in the preseason, where games don't truly matter all that much, you have to limit that. But they do need to figure out this offense, and will they be able to gel? How smooth will they look? They have looked good in the preseason in the past, as far as just Rodgers going out there, throwing a touchdown, and sitting the rest of the game. We have to figure out the proper playing time and getting everybody on the same page This is a new offense. This is a new team. They have new schemes. They have new ways of calling audibles, everything. So that is going to be obviously the major storyline heading into training camp. I'm going to be watching it. You're going to be watching it. If you look at the Packers' schedule right away there at the beginning of the season, it's not going to be a very easy going right away. You're at Chicago. You're home against the Vikings. At week 4, you have you're hosting the Philadelphia Eagles on Thursday Night Football. They're not going to have a whole lot of time to get things gelling right at the start of the regular season, because they have to go out there and they have to act like they at least know what they're doing and put up some points. And I don't think they're going to have problems scoring, but I want to, I hope it looks smooth at least once the regular season, finally comes around. So these are things that I'm going to be watching. I want to see obviously Rodgers out there probably getting more playing time. I want to see receivers running the right routes. I want to see the communication there. I'm interested on if they're going to be showing their full run pass balance more so in the preseason, or quite frankly, if you just need to get Rodgers out there throwing some balls and getting on the same page with his receivers in the preseason. We're 50 days, or I guess if we look at the time this goes live, we are 48 days away from the start of the NFL season. So they have a lot of work to do. You have a new playbook, you have a new system, you have new schemes, all that good stuff. It's going to be something that we watch from week to week. We hope to see progression every single preseason game. And that has to be the top highlight out of everything that I've listed. Next Friday, we're going to have 1 day of training camp under the belt. I will probably have some news about that. But then after that, it's just nonstop. There's going to be practices here and there, or everywhere, up and down, on the ground, in a box full of... This is a family show. So as always, thank you for watching the show. Again, if you are not a subscriber, go ahead and click that subscriber button. Nobody's gonna judge you. I'm personally gonna probably love you if you go ahead and click that subscribing button. And down in the comments, I expect a lot of comments from this week's episode. I wanna get a little bit of a Q&A session going for next week's video. Like I said, there's only gonna be that one training camp practice before that Friday episode. So leave some comments down below. What are your headlines? What are some things that you feel like I've missed? Because I know you guys love pointing out things that I've missed and things that I have said wrong, especially about the Ohio State Buckeyes. They are not the Ohio State Buccaneers. So leave your comments down below. I will read them. I will comment on them. I will use some of that as fuel for my episode next week. And until next time, I will see you on the internet. Thanks for watching.